know you started playing piano at a young age, and you had parents who were musicians, I believe. What drew you specifically to composing for film rather than playing in bands or songwriting, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I've done both, and actually, I did start out with the dream of being a rock star, like so many people who were born around the time I was. And I did that for a number of years. When I was 15, I joined a band, a bunch of professional guys in their mid 20s. I went to the audition with my mother's blazer with the shoulder pads in it so that I would look older than 15. And they would joke that when I turned sideways, I disappeared because I was so thin. Still hadn't hit my growth spurt yet, but I did that for years and loved it. But there was always something about film music that I loved, and I grew up. I was really young for those iconic, Jaws, E.T. Jaws was a bit before my time, but E.T. and Star Wars scores that had those earworms that people can amazingly still recall today on a whim. So that kind of hooked me into film music and really fell in love with the emotional aspect of what that can do to a story.
Hmm. And how did you learn that skill set? And what was your first gig? Was it like a student film or something else?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think I did any film work. I did some plays in university. I scored some theatrical stuff. And then I was really fortunate that the band that I'd played in, one of their keyboard players years prior had been Michael Dana. And I had met him once or twice. And in the middle of doing jingles, after I left university, I did jingles for a little better half of the year. And I thought I really want to be doing scoring, and went and talked to Michael Dana and talked to his brother Jeff. And lo and behold, the world just worked out really well that he was looking for an assistant around the time I was looking for any entrance into that line of work. So it worked out really well.
Wow, that's great. And I guess let's get into Mayor of Kingstown. Let's start with the theme that you wrote, which is pretty haunting.
Cool.
How did you choose that instrumentation? Why did you make those choices? And what was the recording process like? Because I understand that it's pretty special.
Yeah, so the theme, I had been introduced, Andrea von Forster is the music supervisor. She had introduced me to Taylor when he was talking about this project. And the first thing Taylor did was sent me all the scripts, said, here's 10 scripts, read them and we'll talk. I read them. I remember reading the first few and going, wow, these are pretty addictive. And then the last 6, I just read in one sitting because the last 6 episodes of the season are just insane. How you just want to consume it as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. So, and then I sat down and I started writing ideas. And one of the things I thought of, was reminded of, there was a filmmaker who did Cool Hand Luke named Frank Pearson. And years ago, I was attached to a film that sadly never got made that he wrote the script for. So I'd done a fair bit of research and had really looked into what he'd done in the past. And Cool Hand Luke, and I had this image of Paul Newman and the chain gang, all the prisoners working on the road, communicating, singing, and that somehow really stuck with me. And I think that's kind of the vibe and the idea I was trying to embody with the theme, is this the humanity side of it, of really the incarceration story from the inside, not the outside, and trying to really get in the heads of that. And I think there was a certain amount of, there's such a history to the incarceration system in the States that I wanted to try to access that with the music in some way. So it's funny, other people have asked me this. I can't really say why it fits. I can't, but it just feels like it does to me.
But you actually recorded in a prison, right? For a lot of the music for this?
I did. So I was really lucky that my childhood home family is in Canada. That's where I am right now. And they filmed actually about 2 hours away from where I am. So I was able to go back and forth to set quite a bit. And the prison that they filmed at is a decommissioned penitentiary. And I was able to get into that space prior to them filming, prior to them actually building the sets, and was really haunted by the acoustics of the space. So we got inside, me and a bunch of musicians and recording engineer, and brought a bunch of instruments and a bunch of ideas of things I wanted to record, and very quickly realized that the space had this acoustic sonic story it really wanted to tell. You'd make any sound you'd make would go through the filter of the reverb of the room and come back at you with this very distinct flavor. So that ended up being a really important part of the score. And we ended up actually going around the prison and using the mallets and the bows to create all of these really interesting sounds.
Yeah, I saw some clips of like mallets being used on stairwells and violin bows on all these railings and stuff. Have you ever done that kind of on-site recording before? Is that a new aspect for you?
Yeah, no, the on-site thing was probably born out of one of the first big studio films I did, or one of the early ones, was a film, Journey to the Mysterious Island, with The Rock and Michael Caine, and
yeah,
and it was directed by Brad Payton, and Brad really challenged me on that film to find the sound of Melanesia, Polynesia, but the actual historic ancestral sound of that, not the missionaries or the colonialists version. So what ended up happening on that trip, and that was probably 10 years ago now, I ended up backpacking through Papua New Guinea and the jungles of Papua New Guinea, and meeting and studying the music of these tribes that were really removed from any modern influences. So I guess since then, I've always kind of looked into stories and tried to figure out, how can I get inside the story? How can I do a whole bunch of research that'll give me a different perspective, maybe an insider's perspective on what the music should sound like. And so I think the trip to the prison was definitely born out of that. But also in the story, Jeremy Renner's character is a former inmate. He spent so much time incarcerated himself, and he's now in this situation in the town where he's in a life he can't escape. He can't escape the town. He wants to be doing something completely different, but he's incarcerated still. So that idea and the symbolism of really having that reverb and that oppressive acoustic sound flavoring the score for Jeremy's character in the town, and really drawing the parallel between he hasn't really gotten out.
Right. And so in the show itself, the show can be pretty dark and pretty heavy at times.
Yeah.
And you do an excellent job of bringing in emotional pieces and themes without it ever being heavy-handed. Was that a challenge for you to do, or was something you were conscious of while you were writing?
Yeah, definitely conscious of it. Taylor and I talked early on about really making sure that we paint this dark canvas and then peel away the darkness in a few places and see little glimmers of light. And he had to, I was more trepidatious sometimes in going there and worrying, because when you're working with really great actors and really great script writing and great directors, you have that whole side of the production team is walking a tightrope to make sure they're just showing enough emotion, or they're restrained enough, or there's a very fine line, and music can really blow that wide open. If someone's sitting there quite stoic and music's playing this incredibly emotional thing, it kind of can very easily ruin what's going on. So I worked pretty closely with Taylor to try to figure out where are the moments where we can hint at these things, and also with the acting being as great as it was, it's not, it's an honor to get to score things like that, where the music is only trying to make it better and not trying to solve any things that didn't quite work on the day. One of the cool things that ended up happening, and I remember this distinctly in one of the first cuts, is we started putting music, and then we'd kind of find, okay, there's an element of hope, or we have this theme called Leave Someday, which is sort of what Jeremy aspires to instead of this world. And what was really interesting is sometimes in adding that little bit of hope, it made it even more devastating, because it almost makes you realize how dark the tub is that you've been sitting in until you hear that. And suddenly you go, wow, it's almost like being underwater and thinking the surface is 10 meters above or 30 feet above, but in fact it's 500 feet above, and you realize just how low you've gone. So it was funny and unanticipated that it had that effect as well.
Sure, that makes sense. And if you went into the prison early, you said, and started composing based on the scripts. So what was it like actually taking the music that you were working on and putting it to the picture once they'd filmed everything?
Yeah, one of the really cool things that happened in this, because I got started so early and was writing suites and sketches, the editorial team and Taylor and the producers started temping with it. They said, great, we're not going to temp with other music. We're going to temp with these sketches. And they were able to give me feedback and show me scenes early on and say, hey, this is working. We don't quite have anything yet for this. And it worked really well. And it not only kind of allowed me a lot of extra time to experiment and throw ideas on and see if they worked, but a lot of times the editor would come back and say, I know you didn't write this for this scene, but we've tried it in this moment. And they would give me ideas and a different perspective maybe on than I otherwise would have scored it. So it was a really collaborative effort in that way. And, composers are really lucky to get to work with the director in that way, sort of in the 11th hour of filmmaking, but to actually get to work with the production team and go to set and talk to the different directors of the other episodes and work with the producers and the editors. It was a real collaborative effort. And the music really benefited from me having that resource.
Sure. I think normally when you think of a film composer, you think of someone who comes in at the end of the process and scores to a completed or almost completed thing. Is this process more unique to television, and do you prefer that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare, actually, and I've been fortunate to have it with recurring filmmakers like Brad Payton or Richie Mehta or Mina Shum, people like that who I've worked with on many projects. I get brought in early and we start writing ideas based on the script stage. I love it. I mean, it's challenging sometimes to come on at the end of the process in the last 6 weeks or 12 weeks and people have already done so much of the problem solving and have this relationship with the temp music already, and sometimes your hands are tied and you're up against a much bigger wall in terms of throwing unique ideas into the mix, and what about this, what about that, because they've already lived with it for such a long period of time. So they're pretty established at that point with their ideas in most cases. But I love this. I love also being able to write and go down a couple of avenues that might not be successful, and they're dead ends all the time, but it's in those dead ends that you end up sometimes finding a way through that is different than anything you've done before, or maybe a different approach to how you would score something like this typically. So there's a lot of freedom in that I really like.
Sure. And going back to the music itself, I believe you used a bunch of like medieval instruments in this as well.
Yeah. In fact, that was an earlier idea than that's a lot of the stuff we took into the prison, and it stays in.
Why did you choose those? What made you go that route?
Yeah. Well, a couple of reasons. One, there's this amazing hurdy-gurdy player I use, Ben Grossman, who's world-renowned, fantastic, and he has these really interesting techniques of putting pickups on his medieval hurdy-gurdy, And then you get this electronic version of the sound that you can put through all your pedals, and analog surge and reverbs and cool things like that. So that was a resource I definitely wanted to use. The other thing, just in general, I think the idea of the medieval instruments that I was using, they're quite restrained in their emotional quality. So you can't do vibrato. You can't make it swell in an emotional way. It's already just the nature of the instrument predisposes you to a somewhat colder template musically. And I liked that. I liked that the tuning wasn't perfect. I liked that there were little noises that happened when you cranked something or you hit a key switch thing. It felt very human and raw. And it just really, especially when we got them in the prison, it just really felt like it fit the world, that we're not going to hide. There's no makeup. We're not hiding any of the blemishes or any of the flaws in the story or in the characters. Everything is out there, and I really liked that.
Sure. Yeah, I think it fits perfectly with the show. So you obviously put a ton of care and thought into your instrumentation and your music. So unrelated to Mayor of Kingstown, you've scored 3 movies starring The Rock, San Andreas, Rampage, Journey 2. Even though he's playing different characters, do you find it a challenge to keep coming up with new themes for the same actor?
Yeah, I don't. I think he is. Everyone loves him, and he's such he's one of those characters that you want to see. You sit down and see a movie, and you just want to see him win, and in each of those films, I mean, Journey 2 was very influenced by the Polynesian, Melanesian, Papua New Guinea trip, and then San Andreas was a really interesting one because the music for that, it's funny because anytime I have a piece of score, and sometimes it gets temped, and I'll get a phone call from the producer, from the music editor, and say, "What's this from?" And I'll say, "Oh, that's from San Andreas." And they say, "Oh, it doesn't sound like it's from San Andreas." But the cool thing about San Andreas was, and I think with Dwayne and his films, you've already got this big muscular superhero, and you've got earthquakes in San Andreas. You've got all the action on screen. So with the music, I think the music's big role in that film, well, there's some really big, obviously aggressive, adrenaline-filled moments. Its purpose was to make you care about the characters so that you are watching someone you care about go through life-threatening situations and try to overcome insurmountable odds instead of just commenting on the spectacle of it with the music. So, and then Rampage was very much, I mean, there was an element of that, but it was so influenced by the intellectual property that it was based on with the game. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of Dwayne's. He's also a really good guy, and his team are really good people. So it's really fun, and he's really musical. He and Hiram, who runs his company, they're both have a big musical background. So it's not hard to come up with new ideas and pitch them crazy music things that inevitably they get on board with.
Very cool. Okay, last one. Is there something else you're working on right now that you're excited about?
Yeah. So sorry, continue.
That was it. I just
okay. Yes. So finishing Mayor of Kingstown, and I'm starting a series with Richie Mehta, the director I mentioned. He did Delhi Crime, which I scored for him a few years ago, which won the International Emmy Award for drama, which was great. And we're doing a project right now upcoming. And I'm also early writing on another Brad Peyton film. We're writing themes right now, and we've been researching. It's crazy. We've been researching this for probably 3 years now, but he's teaming up with Jennifer Lopez and her team doing a film for Netflix, which is going to be amazing.